listening to the first season of Serial, Sarah Koenig's breakout true crime drama, a spin-off of This American Life that's become the most popular podcast in the history of the form, has been like observing a low-fi but formidable space launch. All the parts have ticked and glistened. In Miss Koenig, an unlikely star has been born. The story she's intimately told over the course of 12 episodes has made plenty of us drive a bit wobblier. A lot of podcast listeners tap into their car stereos via Bluetooth, and feel the occasional tingle of campfire narration or. Yet stories, especially non-fiction murder inquiries like this one, require endings. A question has burned from the start: would Miss Koenig be able to guide Serial home, that is, would it arrive at resolution about the guilt or innocence of the imprisoned young man, Adnan said, at its center, or would it pull a slow fade into indeterminacy, like the Philly Comet lander, which ditched in the shade and slowly lost battery power? Mike Pesca, on a recent Slate podcast, practically begged Miss Koenig for closure. "Don't let this," he said, "wind up being a contemplation on the nature of truth." Slate, which has its own litter of podcasts, has covered Serial as assiduously as the British tabloids cover a royal birth. Miss Koenig has been candid about the fact that definitive answers. She's performed her investigation in something like real time. Tightrope walking without the benefit of a net may be impossible to come by. On Thursday morning, our long national nightmare of suspense ended. The 12th and final episode of the first season of Serial beamed online at 6 a.m. I won't be fully able to duck spoilers here, so proceed with caution. As absorbing as this final episode was, somewhere out there, Mr. Pesca surely has his head in his hands. The last episode was a tangled and heartfelt yet frustrating hour of radio in which Miss Koenig hemmed and hawed and pored back over old evidence and asked, did we just spend a year applying excessive scrutiny to a perfectly ordinary case? The answer to that question, apparently, is no and yes and no. Unlike the conclusions of Agatha Christie novels, real life can make only murky puddles. For those who haven't kept up, the Serial podcast is about a murder that happened almost 16 years ago in Baltimore County, MD. Minutes Lee, a smart, attractive and athletic senior at Woodlawn High School, disappeared after school on January 13, 1999. Her body turned up almost a month later in a city park. She had been strangled. Her 17-year-old ex-boyfriend, Mr. Sid, was popular, outgoing, a Woodlawn High homecoming prince. He was arrested in the crime and eventually sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. The case against him was hardly airtight, but the key witness, a friend of Mr. Sid's named Jay, said he had helped him bury Miss Lee's body in the woods. Mr. Sid has always maintained his innocence. Those are the basic facts. Yet the story Miss Koenig has told has been far more winding, complicated and offbeat. She's poured through court testimony, cell phone records and police interrogation tapes. She has interviewed friends, family members, lawyers and forensic specialists. She has poked an array of holes in the state's case, even finding a potential alibi that was overlooked in court. She took a deep dive into the Islamophobia that may have been at work in the case. Would the American-born Mr. Sid, who is of Pakistani descent, have been convicted had he not been a Muslim? You could tell Miss Koenig has often thought that Mr. Sid is probably innocent, or at a minimum, received from his lawyers a half-hearted defense. She came to like him, and so did we. But as she put it in one episode, what if he is this amazing psychopath, and I'm getting played? The soul of Serial has been in the way Miss Koenig has done her digging so transparently, airing niggling doubts along the way. She's incorporated new evidence, sometimes from people who called her only after having their memories jogged by the most recent podcast. As she has moved along, she has uprooted the way murder mysteries are usually told. She's allowed us to feel like Harper Lee, riding shotgun with Truman Capote as he reported in Cold Blood, before he conveniently mangled facts in his telling. Serial plowed up entire fields of odd detail for listeners to linger over. The man who discovered Miss Lee's partly buried body, a potential suspect who is referred to as Mr. S, turned out to have a penchant for streaking. A phrase that popped out of the mouth of the serial producer Dana Chivers during a reenactment of a crucial event, "There's a shrimp sale at the crab crib," became a tasty internet meme. I made the mistake of Googling the phrase, and now t-shirts bearing the slogan follow me across the internet. At the conclusion of the final episode of Serial, Miss Koenig, channeling Henry Fonda in 12 Angry Men, remarks that, as a juror, I have to acquit Adnan Syed. Yet she's a journalist, not a juror. She adds, so just as a human being, walking down the street next week, what do I think? If you ask me to swear that Adnan Syed is innocent, I couldn't do it. I nursed out. Many will listen and conclude, they got the right guy. Serial has demonstrated the bedrock truth of Calvin Trillin's assertion in his book Killings, 1984, that when someone dies suddenly shades are drawn up. A murder gives us an excuse to be there, poking around in someone's life. The human details tend to be why we're there. They're what resonate, even if the whodunit elements never catch fire. Endings aren't as important to me, in terms of fiction at any rate, as they are to many people. I've had mighty arguments on this topic with friends. If a writer has kept me hooked on a long westward cross-country drive and blows a tire at the Nevada-California border, I rarely hold a grudge. I bail out on most writers back in Scranton. This is a way of saying that no matter how Serial stuck its landing, I had decided by episode 3 that I could follow Miss Koenig's work wherever it took her. She is an agile writer of cool, declarative sentences. Her voice, literate, probing, witty, seemingly without guile, is an intoxicating one to have in your head. She has come on like equal parts Janet Malcolm, Nancy Drew, Patricia Cornwell and the Errol Morris of documentaries like The Thin Blue Line. I liked to imagine her, as if she were Claire Danes in Homeland, haphazardly taping bits of evidence along an apartment wall while pounding Syrah and cranking John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. Even the stop-and-start verbalizations and vocal fry, overused crutches on public radio, sound good on her. The sound Serial has made is a personal one, that of a smart woman puzzling it all out. If a part of the impact of Serial has been watching Miss Koenig's rise, another part has been watching the revivifying of an old form, the radio serial. She's made a show that seems dowdy and postmodern all at once. Each episode found its own length, from 28 to 56 minutes. There's a primal pull to radio drama that many of us had nearly forgotten. We were eager on some level, perhaps too eager, to submit to the spell that Serial cast. Miss Koenig is a producer on This American Life, Ira Glass's popular public radio show. It's a broadcast I've long been of two minds about. The best of its segments spang the nail cleanly home. A great many others blow a uniquely grating sort of wind and deliver more style, usually imitations of Mr. Glass's own, than substance. In Serial, Miss Koenig has managed to put her understated style fully in service of her substance. Which is not to say that the show didn't have its lacunae. Among other things, it never really brought Miss Lee, the crime's victim, to life. Despite multiple efforts, Miss Koenig told us, the victim's family never spoke with her. Her hunch about this story, despite an inconclusive, Sopranos-like ending, has paid off. Serial has replaced This American Life as the most downloaded podcast on iTunes, with an average of nearly 3 million listeners per episode. After an online fundraising effort, a second season is in the works. A writer for The Guardian has called the fever around the show the Beatlemania of the Nebuchadnezzar public radio long-form non-fiction world. Miss Koenig, in this world, is for now Paul and John at the same time. The backlash against Serial is sure to commence momentarily. In a few places, it began weeks ago, which may end up being a tonic for the show and for everyone else. We'll see knockoffs of all stripes in the near future. Serial isn't truly over. There's still untested DNA evidence. Mr. Said hopes for appeals. Like the sleeping Philly comet lander, the case may yet catch some sunlight and blip back to life. For now, though we are left bereft and a bit baffled by the ending of Serial, It's pleasant to recall the way Miss Koenig announced in episode 4, before wading through a bit of long and technical courtroom testimony, "I'm going to try very hard not to bore you right now." With few exceptions, she never did.